I would like to talk to you today a little bit about a process, not so much an output, although some of you might have heard or seen the book that's come out recently, The Politics of Species. What I'm interested to talk to you about is not so much the book and make a plug for the book, but more to talk about why and how that came about. The Arcus Foundation was created in 2000, and it has two areas of focus. The first area is, or one of the two areas, is social justice, with a particular emphasis on lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people around the world. And the second area of focus is on great apes, conservation and welfare of apes, also around the world. And this is not because the Arcus Foundation considers apes more important than other species, or because they are so closely related to humans they are in some way relevant in a way that other species might not be. But it's because as a foundation, we need to focus on a few things in order to try and achieve impact, and in order to achieve behavior change in some of the areas that we feel are really important. And apes, and the habitat of apes, includes many other species. So by focusing on apes, which are a taxonomic group that we do feel are very important, we also understand that that will include many other species in those ecosystems. And it'll also include the human communities that live in those landscapes, and many of whom are facing social justice issues and concerns as well about their welfare and their well-being. The Arcus Great Ape strategy specifically has three areas of emphasis, three goals. The first is reconciling socioeconomic development and conservation. And that really is focusing on conservation of apes in the range states where they occur, across tropical belt of Africa and Southeast Asia. And it's focusing in on priority landscapes which have humans and apes in them, these mosaic landscapes where we are trying to conserve those landscapes and understand and conserve them, taking into consideration the drivers, which are the drivers and threats to apes, which include consumption, which include disease, hunting, as well as habitat destruction. The second goal is that of building a more integrated and coordinated movement. And that's both in the world of captive apes in range states as well as outside range states, like in the United States, as well as the conservation movements that's trying to protect the habitats and well-being of apes around the world. And that means coordinated and integrated organizations working more effectively together, but organizations also working with other disciplines and other areas in order to mainstream the conservation focus and the welfare focus, so that it isn't seen as something that's isolated and working on its own. And it also means coordinating the support for conservation and for welfare from donors, governments, policymakers, etc. So it's looking at it in a much more holistic way and not as a separate area of focus that only people who care about animals, who care about apes, are concerned about. And the third focus, the third goal, is improving respect and recognition for the intrinsic value of apes. Now, in order to improve respect and recognition, obviously we need to have the knowledge, and we need to know what it is about them that is deserving of respect, and understanding the animals, their behavior, their abilities, their sentience, and their emotional depth. But it's also about recognizing that it's not just an absence of knowledge that's the impediment, that's getting in the way of them being treated well or being able to live secure lives in the wild. But it's also the attitudes and the cultures and the beliefs of people with respect to apes. And it's particularly for this third goal of improving respect and recognition of the intrinsic value of apes that the Arcus Foundation organized in 2011 a round table in New York, which we called Humans and Other Apes, Rethinking the Species Interface. Now that round table was really intending to explore why we exclude non-human animals from consideration and consider them outside of the circle of our concern? What are the barriers to us extending to them, the empathy and the recognition of their sentience, their ability for suffering, their ability to feel joy, and everything else that we now know is there, and is there for many animals. And I'm not just talking about apes, I'm talking about all sorts of sentient creatures. Is that barrier a barrier in our knowledge, that we just don't know about their sentience, that we just don't know about their ability for suffering? Or is that barrier truly based on the belief that our dominion over non-human animals is justified? And not only that that dominion is justified, but that it should be interpreted that their exploitation is necessary for our survival. So the round table brought together a range of different people from different disciplines, and it was structured around these 4 points. The first was really trying to understand and discuss the inherent qualities of non-human animals and the current attitudes to non-human animals. Now, I want to specify that the context within which we framed this was very much the Western world and the Western influence world. It's a huge world, and attitudes and beliefs are very different in different parts of the world. We focused specifically on the West and countries influenced by these Western beliefs. It doesn't mean that the others are not important, it just means that that will be another discussion at another time. You can't include everything. The second point that we discussed was the barriers to a more inclusive definition of rights and morality, as well as responsibility. And from then we moved into what are the implications of this to our current attitudes with respect to non-human animals and sentient beings, and their position in our culture. And finally, what we hope to tease out from these discussions was some better way of understanding what are the most effective approaches and strategies to influence the attitudes and behavior of humans. At the end of the day, our goal really was to try and change behavior and change the way we treat other non-human animals and the way in which we include them in our consideration. And some of that is knowledge and the need for knowledge, and some of that is behavior change based on attitudes and culture. The point of the meeting was not to have a bunch of primatologists or a bunch of conservationists talking together about things that we always talk together about. The point was for it to be as multidisciplinary as we could make it, and see what are the commonalities between all these different fields, and what is the thinking going on in these different fields, and where are the similarities that we can pull them together. So we had philosophers included, we had ethnologists, primatologists, ethologists, people working in neuroscience, in the law, medical science, journalism, conservation, and sociology. Contributors to the meeting included Steve Wise, Laurie Marino, and Laurie Gruen, who've spoken here today. They also included Bill McGrew, who was one of the 9 scientists who advised on the Non-Human Rights Project. So it was a whole range of different people from different backgrounds with different ways of analyzing the problem, different ways of looking at the problem, and perhaps different ideas that together could help strengthen our understanding of what the problem is, what the barriers are, and potentially what some of the approaches and strategies could be. And the result was this book, which is available, published by Cambridge University Press. It wasn't intended to be the output. It was actually the conversation, the process of discussing it and trying to come up with approaches and strategies was the intended output. This was a byproduct, but what it is it's one more tool in an arsenal of tools that we need. This is a tool that brings together all these different perspectives, and sometimes very different perspectives of which, as one of the co-editors, you don't necessarily agree with everybody's standpoint. You don't necessarily have to agree with everybody's standpoint and all the arguments they put forward. What you do want to agree on is the objective of where you want to go with that. And people are going to come at it from different perspectives and from different viewpoints. And that's legitimate. We had people who were very strong animal activists, and we had others who came at it from a much more anthropocentric and utilitarian economic paradigm. And all of those different viewpoints and those different politics of the speakers at the round table enriched our conversation and enriched our understanding of what the issues are, and also what the barriers are. Some of the things that Steve Wise and Laurie Marino are going to be facing over the coming months are those different viewpoints and standpoints. And so it's helpful to have the conversation and understand what those arguments are. At the end of the day, it did come down to those shared objectives of improving the welfare and the survival of all the species on this planet, and hopefully reshaping our attitudes and our tolerance and our ability to coexist respectfully with all other species on this planet. And to do that, we really do need to unravel the complex historical and psychological underpinnings of our, in this conversation, largely Western perspective on non-human animals. And we need to strive for a more just and humane attitude, and one that's more inclusive. So concepts such as entangled empathy, as Laurie Gruen was discussing, and multi-species ethnography, and compassionate conservation, and respectful coexistence were all concepts that were discussed, as well as concepts of the theory of mind. And do chimpanzees and other apes actually have a true theory of mind? And discussing the whole range of different perspectives on that, with not everybody agreeing on those points. So the emphasis was on understanding the attitudes, and then looking at some of the different cultures around the world and how those can be quite radically different from those Western attitudes, and bringing those together and discussing them, and then trying to come up with some of the different ways in which we could increase the respect and value for apes and other sentient beings around the world. So this is just a very brief presentation of the main points that this roundtable discussed, and one of the different ways in which the Arcus Foundation is trying to achieve its third goal of increasing respect and value for apes. And some of that is going to be on tools addressing knowledge gaps, such as a book like this, and some of that is going to be on looking at and investigating the attitudes and cultures of people around the world where apes occur into the wild, understanding what for them are the barriers, which are not necessarily knowledge barriers, which might be the lack of alternatives, economic alternatives. If they are out there hunting bonobos for food, then it might be because they don't have any other alternatives for protein, and they are people who are hunting for food. And so then the strategies would be looking for economic alternatives and trying to find other ways in which they could satisfy the needs to feed their children. So there are, and feed themselves. So there are many different ways in which this has to be addressed, and there are many different strategies that can be deployed. Filling knowledge gaps, social marketing strategies, culture change strategies, all of these strategies are different ways in which we would hope to increase the respect and value of apes around the world. And by doing that, potentially protecting their habitats and the landscapes in which they occur, and benefiting both the people as well as all the other species that are living in those landscapes. So thank you very much. That's what I wanted to say.